I'm Madison, 28, and last Easter dinner changed everything in our family. My brother Derek, the self-proclaimed tech genius, was on his usual ego trip, belittling everyone's careers. When he proclaimed, "Not everyone can handle a real career in tech," while glancing at me, I wanted to disappear. But then my quiet 75-year-old Grandma Elaine set down her fork, smiled mysteriously, and turned our entire family dynamic upside down. Before I continue this story, let me know where you're watching from the comments, hit that like button, and subscribe for more family revelations that might just inspire your own. My relationship with Grandma Elaine has always been special. After Mom passed away when I was 12, Grandma stepped in to fill that maternal void in my life. Every Saturday, without fail, I'd visit her cozy two-bedroom house with the faded blue shutters and wraparound porch where she'd teach me to make our treasured family recipes. The smell of her cinnamon apple pie still takes me right back to her warm kitchen, where she'd listen to my teenage problems with the kind of patience only grandmothers seem to possess. "Madison, dear," she'd often say while kneading dough, her fingers working with practiced precision, "family is like this dough. Sometimes you need to work through the tough spots to make something wonderful." Her wisdom was always delivered so simply, wrapped in everyday moments that made it stick with me. Grandma Elaine had been widowed for 15 years. My grandfather Thomas had been a kind, soft-spoken accountant who adored her completely. After his passing, she never remarried, instead focusing on her garden, her grandchildren, and her community volunteer work at the local library. She lived simply but comfortably in the same house where she'd raised my father and his siblings. Derek, on the other hand, wasn't always the arrogant tech bro he'd become. Growing up, we were actually close. Just 2 years apart, we built elaborate blanket forts, rode bikes through neighborhood puddles, and defended each other from playground bullies. I still remember him as a freckle-faced 10-year-old helping me with math homework, patiently explaining fractions using pizza slices as examples. The change began during his college years at an elite tech university. Each time he came home for breaks, he seemed to have adopted more of what I called his tech personality. First, it was just the vocabulary. Suddenly everything was about disrupting industries and leveraging synergies. By junior year, he started making comments about salary potentials and giving unsolicited advice about marketable skills. By graduation, the transformation was complete. The brother who once helped me with math using pizza analogies now explained things with a patronizing tone, prefacing explanations with, "Well, actually," and ending with, "But that's probably too technical for you to understand." He'd showcase his latest gadgets, name-drop tech companies, and find ways to mention his salary or stock options in unrelated conversations. Dad tried his best to maintain family harmony. "Your brother's just excited about his new world," he'd tell me when I'd complain about Derek's attitude. "He'll settle down eventually." But 3 years into Derek's tech career, he'd only gotten worse, especially when it came to disparaging other professions. When I decided to become an elementary school teacher, Derek's reaction was immediate disappointment. "All that potential wasted," he said, as if I'd announced I was dropping out of society altogether. "You could have coded, Madison. You were good at logic puzzles as a kid." He didn't understand that I found genuine fulfillment helping second graders have their aha moments with reading or watching their faces light up when a science experiment worked. My modest teacher's salary became a frequent target of his not-so-subtle jabs, especially at family gatherings. The rest of our family had developed various coping mechanisms for Derek's behavior. Aunt Patricia would change the subject whenever he started on one of his tech rants. Uncle Robert would nod politely while clearly thinking about something else entirely. Our cousins Emma and Justin would exchange knowing glances across the table. Dad would attempt to moderate by highlighting everyone's achievements, regardless of field or salary. Previous holidays had become increasingly tense. Last Thanksgiving, Derek had spent 20 minutes explaining blockchain to our entire family, despite no one asking. At Christmas, he'd given everyone Amazon gift cards of varying amounts that suspiciously seemed correlated to how impressive he found their careers. Mine was notably smaller than our cousin Justin's, who worked in finance. Throughout all these gatherings, Grandma Elaine remained an oasis of calm and unconditional love. She treated all her grandchildren equally, showing the same interest in my classroom stories as she did in Derek's tech achievements. She never seemed bothered by his condescension, often just smiling and changing the subject to something more inclusive. There were hints about Grandma's past that, looking back, should have clued us in. The old black and white photos in her hallway included a few of her standing next to what looked like early computing equipment. Once, when I was helping her clean out her attic, we found a box of technical manuals with her handwritten notes in the margins. When I asked about them, she simply said they were from an old job and suggested we take a break for lemonade. Dad occasionally mentioned that Grandma had worked with computers before retiring, but the family narrative had always centered on Grandpa Thomas's career while Grandma was primarily described as a devoted mother and homemaker. None of us had ever really questioned this version of her life, perhaps because she never corrected it or offered more details. Her modest nature was part of her charm. Unlike Derek, who couldn't go 10 minutes without mentioning his accomplishments, Grandma Elaine preferred to listen rather than talk about herself. Humility is underrated these days, she once told me while we watched a particularly boastful reality TV contestant. I didn't realize then how much she lived by those words. Easter had always been Grandma Elaine's holiday. While Thanksgiving belonged to Aunt Patricia and Christmas rotated between households, Easter dinner was invariably at Grandma's house, with her spiral-cut ham, scalloped potatoes, and carrot cake that somehow stayed moist for days. That Sunday morning, I arrived early to help her prepare. The spring sunlight streamed through her kitchen windows as we worked side by side, me peeling potatoes while she checked on the ham. Her hands, slightly gnarled with arthritis, but still nimble, moved with practiced efficiency as she glazed the meat with brown sugar, pineapple, and cloves. "Are you ready for Derek?" I asked cautiously, trying to keep my tone light. I'd been dreading his arrival all week. "Everyone deserves a place at the family table, Madison," she replied with her typical diplomacy. Even those still finding their way. I loved how she always saw the best in people, even when they didn't deserve it. "He's not finding his way, Grandma. He's convinced he's reached the pinnacle of human achievement by debugging code for a startup." She chuckled softly. Pride often comes before a period of learning. There was something in her tone I couldn't quite place, not quite mischief, but a knowing quality that I attributed to her decades of wisdom. As we arranged her good china, only used for Easter and Christmas, I felt the familiar mix of anticipation and anxiety that now accompanied family gatherings. The table looked beautiful, light blue tablecloth, yellow cloth napkins, her crystal glasses inherited from her mother, and the centerpiece of daffodils and tulips from her garden. "Your mother always loved these flowers," Grandma said softly as she adjusted a yellow tulip. These small mentions of Mom were precious to me, keeping her memory alive in our traditions. At precisely 1 o'clock, family members began arriving. First came Aunt Patricia and Uncle Robert with their homemade rolls and green bean casserole. Then my cousins Emma and Justin with their respective partners, bearing wine and desserts. Dad arrived with his new girlfriend Susan, whom he'd been dating for about 6 months. I liked her. She was a librarian with a quick laugh and kind eyes. Derek arrived last, 40 minutes after the stated time, pulling up in his gleaming Tesla. He entered carrying an expensive bottle of wine and a small bag from a high-end bakery containing artisanal chocolates that he presented to Grandma with a kiss on her cheek. "Sorry I'm late, Grandma. Video call with Singapore ran long," he announced to the room, though nobody had asked. He looked around the living room with what I recognized as his subtly judgmental expression. "Place looks the same as always. Comforting how some things never change, right?" The backhanded compliment made me cringe, but Grandma just thanked him for the gifts and asked about his drive. He launched into a monologue about his car's autopilot features while the rest of us exchanged glances. Dad tried his best to integrate Derek into the general conversation. "Derek, you remember Susan? She was telling us about the library's new computer system earlier." Derek gave Susan a quick once-over. "Oh yeah? What are they running?" "Probably something hopelessly outdated, knowing public funding." Susan, to her credit, remained poised. Actually, we just upgraded to a pretty sophisticated catalog system. I'd love your thoughts on it sometime. Derek nodded dismissively. Sure, though enterprise software isn't really my area. I'm more in cutting-edge development. And so it went as we all moved to the dining room. Grandma's beautiful table setup barely registered with Derek, who immediately checked if there was a power outlet nearby for his phone charger. Got some notifications I need to keep an eye on, he explained to no one in particular. As we settled in, Grandma said her traditional Easter blessing, thanking God for family, food, and the promise of new beginnings. I noticed Derek checking his phone under the table during the prayer. The meal began pleasantly enough. The food was delicious, as always. Grandma's ham was perfectly cooked, the scalloped potatoes creamy, with just the right amount of cheese crust on top. Conversation flowed around the latest neighborhood news, Susan's recent book recommendations, and Emma's new puppy. Madison, how are your second graders doing with that reading program you mentioned last time? Aunt Patricia asked, passing me the basket of rolls. I brightened, always happy to talk about my students. They're making amazing progress. Even Tyler, who was really struggling in the fall, has moved up 2 reading levels. We did this project where they wrote letters to their favorite book characters, and his imagination just... Speaking of progress, Derek interrupted, not even attempting subtlety. My team just shipped a feature that's going to revolutionize how our clients manage their data infrastructure. I fell silent, the wind taken out of my sails. Dad shot Derek a look that went completely ignored as my brother launched into a technical explanation that I was certain most of the table couldn't follow. I noticed Grandma watching him with an expression I couldn't quite read, curiosity mixed with something else. As the main course wound down, Uncle Robert initiated the traditional updates from everyone portion of family gatherings. Emma talked about her nursing challenges during the busy flu season. The hours are brutal sometimes, but when a patient improves enough to go home to their family, it makes it all worthwhile. Justin shared news about his small financial consulting firm, including both successes and struggles. The market's been volatile, but we're helping several local businesses stay afloat during tough times. When my turn came, I kept it brief, still smarting from Derek's earlier interruption. The school's facing budget cuts again, but we're making it work. My kids are putting on a spring performance next month about the water cycle. They're very excited about being raindrops. Derek barely looked up from his phone during these updates, occasionally nodding or making a distracted sound. The tension around the table grew as his turn approached. I caught Dad's eye, silently pleading with him to somehow head off the inevitable, but he just gave a small shrug. There was no stopping what was coming. Well, Derek said when conversation finally turned to him, setting down his phone with exaggerated care. Things at Nexus Tech have been absolutely insane this quarter. Our valuation just hit $2 billion after the last funding round. He paused, clearly expecting impressed reactions. Aunt Patricia obliged with a polite, "That sounds wonderful, dear," which was all the encouragement he needed. We're basically redefining how AI integrates with legacy systems. Nobody's doing what we're doing right now. He launched into a 15-minute monologue filled with technical jargon and industry buzzwords, disruptive innovation, neural networks, blockchain integration, synergistic ecosystems. I watched the faces around the table glaze over. Uncle Robert was absently tracing the pattern on his napkin. Cousin Emma was subtly checking her watch. Even Dad, who usually made valiant efforts to show interest in Derek's work, was struggling to maintain his engaged expression. The thing is, Derek continued, warming to his favorite topic himself. The technical challenges we're solving require a very specific mindset. Our latest sprint had us refactoring the entire backend while maintaining API compatibility, and let me tell you, that separates the real engineers from the script kiddies. He took a sip of wine, looking around the table. We had to let go of 3 developers last month who just couldn't keep up with the pace. That's the thing about real tech work. It's not for everyone. You either have what it takes or you don't. The temperature in the room seemed to drop a few degrees. I stared at my plate, knowing what was coming next. Derek leaned back in his chair, swirling his wine glass. Not everyone can handle a real career in tech. It takes a certain intelligence and resilience that's pretty rare, actually. As he said this, he glanced directly at me, with the same condescending smile he'd been giving me since I announced my teaching career. The implication was crystal clear to everyone at the table. The silence that followed was excruciating. I felt my cheeks burning with a mixture of embarrassment and anger. 3 years of these comments, and they still had the power to make me feel small. Dad cleared his throat uncomfortably. Well, we're certainly proud of everyone's accomplishments around this table. Speaking of accomplishments, Susan, didn't you mention that Author Visit Your Library is hosting? Before Susan could respond, my cousin Emma jumped in, unable to contain herself. You know, Derek, nurses use quite a bit of technology too. Our patient monitoring systems are actually pretty sophisticated, and we have to learn new medical tech constantly. Derek gave her what I called his tech bro smile, patronizing and dismissive. Sure, you use tech. That's great. But there's a pretty big difference between using an interface someone like me designed and actually creating the technology. Uncle Robert gave an uncomfortable laugh. Well, not all of us can be tech wizards. Someone's got to keep the rest of the world running, right? I bit my tongue so hard I thought it might bleed. Every family gathering, the same pattern played out. Derek would belittle everyone else's work, someone would try to defuse the tension, and we'd all pretend his behavior was acceptable to keep the peace. I was tired of it, but the thought of creating a scene at Grandma's Easter dinner held me back. Throughout this exchange, I noticed Grandma Elaine watching Derek with an uncharacteristic intensity. She hadn't said much during his monologue, but I could tell she was listening carefully. "Derek," she said, her voice calm but clear, cutting through the tension. "This AI integration you mentioned, are you using supervised or unsupervised learning models?" The question hung in the air. Every head turned toward Grandma in surprise. Derek looked momentarily thrown off, but recovered quickly. Both actually, Grandma. But that's pretty technical. Basically, the computer either needs human input to learn or it can figure out patterns on its own. Grandma nodded. And for your neural network architecture, are you implementing a convolutional approach or recurrent? Derek blinked rapidly. We use a hybrid model, actually. His tone had shifted to something I hadn't heard before, slightly defensive and uncertain. It's pretty cutting-edge stuff. Interesting, Grandma said mildly. And how are you handling the gradient descent optimization? I always found that challenging with complex models. The table had gone completely silent. Dad was staring at Grandma with his mouth slightly open. Derek's expression flickered between confusion and discomfort. "We have a team that handles that specific aspect," he said, his usual confidence wavering. "I'm more focused on the implementation side." Grandma smiled. "Would you excuse me for just a moment? I'd like to get something from my study." As she left the dining room, all eyes turned to Derek, who was now scrolling through his phone with unusual intensity, clearly uncomfortable. "What was that about?" Aunt Patricia whispered to Dad, who shook his head in bewilderment. "I have no idea," he replied. "Mom never talks about tech stuff." Derek attempted to regain control of the conversation. "Anyway, as I was saying about our platform's capabilities, we're really pushing the boundaries of what's possible in the industry. Last week, our CTO actually told me my code quality was setting the standard for the entire engineering department. But the spell was broken. The family was distracted, everyone casting curious glances toward the hallway where Grandma had disappeared. Even Derek seemed to be speaking with less conviction, clearly thrown off by the unexpected technical questions from his 75-year-old grandmother. I was about to finally say something, to call Derek out on his constant need to diminish others, when we heard Grandma's footsteps returning to the dining room. Grandma Elaine walked back into the dining room carrying a worn leather photo album I'd never seen before. Her expression was serene as she resumed her seat at the head of the table. "I think it's time I shared something with all of you," she said, opening the album carefully. "Especially you, Derek, since you're so passionate about your field." She turned the album around so we could all see the first page. There was a black and white photograph of a much younger Grandma, probably in her 20s, standing in what looked like a laboratory or computer room. Behind her was what I recognized from movies as an early computer, enormous by today's standards, with reel-to-reel tapes and a console of blinking lights. This was taken in 1968 at Bell Labs, Grandma said simply. We all leaned forward to look more closely. Grandma in the photo was wearing a professional skirt suit, her hair in the style of the era, standing confidently next to the massive machine. Derek squinted at the image. Was this when you were a secretary there? My company just eliminated the last of our administrative assistants, actually. Everything's digital workflow now. A small smile played at the corners of Grandma's mouth.
Oh, dear.
I wasn't a secretary. This was the first major project I worked on as a computer programmer and systems analyst. The silence that followed was absolute. I looked from the photo to Grandma and back again, trying to process this information that contradicted everything I thought I knew about her life. You were a programmer? I finally managed. For over 30 years, Grandma confirmed, turning to the next page in the album. This showed her sitting at a terminal, clearly working on code. This was the Fortran compiler optimization project I led in the early 70s. Derek's expression was priceless, a mixture of disbelief and growing concern. You coded? In Fortran? Among other languages, yes, Grandma replied. I started with machine language and assembly, then moved to Fortran, COBOL, and later C. I retired before C++ became standard, though I did some consulting work that used it in the early 90s. Dad looked stunned. Mom, you never really talked about your work in detail. I knew you worked with computers, but you always changed the subject when we asked. Grandma turned another page, revealing a group photo of a team standing around what must have been cutting-edge technology at the time. This was my team in 1975. We were working on telecommunications software that helped lay the groundwork for what would eventually become part of the internet infrastructure. That's you in the center, Aunt Patricia said, pointing. You were leading the team? I was the project manager and chief systems architect, Grandma confirmed. It was unusual for a woman to hold that position at the time, which is why I probably downplayed it at home. Your father grew up in an era when mothers were expected to focus on family, not career achievements. Derek had gone very quiet, his earlier bravado evaporated. But technology was so different then. I mean, what I'm doing now is exponentially more complex. Is it? Grandma asked with genuine curiosity. Tell me about your current project, Derek. The specific technical challenges, not just the buzzwords. All eyes turned to Derek, who suddenly looked like he wanted to disappear under the table. Well, we're implementing a distributed system with multiple redundancies and… What's your approach to race conditions in your concurrent processing? Grandma asked. We use standard locking mechanisms, Derek replied, his voice losing confidence with each word. Mutexes and semaphores, or something more sophisticated, Grandma pressed. Derek took a large gulp of wine. A combination of approaches. It's complex. Grandma nodded understandingly. It always is. You know, we faced similar challenges in the 70s, just at a different scale. Without the frameworks and tools you have today, we had to build everything from scratch. Do you work with bare metal programming at all, or primarily with high-level abstractions? Derek's face had turned slightly pale. Mostly high-level. Nobody really does bare metal programming anymore except in specialized fields. That's a shame, Grandma said. Understanding what happens at the hardware level gives you such insight into optimization. When every byte and cycle counted because memory was so limited, you learned to write very efficient code. As this exchange continued, I looked around at my family's faces. Everyone was watching in amazement as our supposedly technologically naive grandmother effortlessly discussed computer science concepts with a family tech expert who was growing increasingly uncomfortable. Aunt Patricia leaned toward Dad and whispered, "Did you know about all this?" Dad shook his head, looking as shocked as the rest of us. She always just said she worked with computers before retiring. I had no idea she was a pioneer. Meanwhile, Grandma continued turning pages in her album, revealing more of her hidden professional past. There were photos of her at conferences, standing next to early personal computers and receiving what looked like awards. "This one," she said, pointing to a particularly interesting photo, "was taken when our team solved a particularly challenging compiler optimization problem. The solution I developed became part of a patent filing." Derek's eyes widened. "You have patents?" "Several," Grandma replied casually. "Though back then, they were often filed under the company's name or my male colleagues' names. Different times." The gradual revelation of Grandma's secret life as a tech pioneer continued as she shared more stories with each turn of the album's page. She described working on early operating systems, developing algorithms that improved processing efficiency, and consulting on government projects that required top security clearance. With each new detail, Derek seemed to physically shrink in his chair, his earlier confidence now completely deflated. The technical terminology Grandma used so casually made it clear that her knowledge wasn't superficial or outdated. She understood the fundamental principles that underlay even today's most advanced systems. The hardware changes, the languages evolve, but the core computer science concepts remain remarkably consistent, she explained. Efficiency, reliability, scalability, we were tackling those same challenges 50 years ago, just with different tools. I couldn't help but feel a surge of pride watching my grandmother reveal this hidden dimension of herself, especially in contrast to Derek's now silent humility. All those years I'd known her primarily as the woman who made perfect pies and tended her garden, never suspecting she had once been at the forefront of a technological revolution. "I think I have a few more things to show you all," Grandma said, closing the photo album and standing up. "Derek, would you help me bring some boxes from my study?" Derek nodded silently, following her out of the dining room like a scolded child. The moment they left, the table erupted in hushed exclamations. "Did anyone know about this?" Emma asked, looking around wildly. "Not a clue," Uncle Robert replied, "though it explains why she's always been so quick with numbers and puzzles." "All these years," I murmured, thinking of the countless times Derek had condescended to Grandma about technology, and how she'd simply smiled and nodded. A few minutes later, Grandma and Derek returned. Derek was carrying a cardboard box, his expression a mixture of awe and embarrassment. Grandma had a framed certificate in her hands. "This is my patent," she said, placing the framed document on the table. "This one is for an algorithm that improved memory allocation in multi-user systems. It's still being used in modified form today." I leaned forward to read the certificate, which was indeed issued to Elaine Margaret Sullivan in 1978. The technical description was beyond my understanding, but the official patent number and seal made it undeniably real. From the box, Grandma began producing more evidence of her impressive career. There were technical journals with her articles, conference badges from events like the early Comdex shows, and letters of recognition from names I recognized from computer history. This was from Douglas Engelbart, thanking me for my contributions to a project related to his work on human-computer interaction, she explained, showing us a personal letter from 1973. There was a photo of her shaking hands with Grace Hopper, one of the few female computing pioneers I'd actually heard of. "Grace was a mentor to many of us women in the field," Grandma said fondly. "Brilliant woman. She's the one who found the first computer bug, an actual moth caught in a relay." Derek was examining everything with intense concentration, as if trying to process this radical revision of his worldview. You actually worked with these people? These are legends in computer science." "They were colleagues," Grandma said simply. "Brilliant ones, certainly, but we were all just trying to solve the same problems. The field was much smaller then. Everyone knew everyone." Dad picked up a newspaper clipping from 1982. "Computer team develops new banking security protocol," read the headline, with a photo of Grandma standing among a group of serious-looking men in suits. "That was a significant project," Grandma explained. "We developed encryption methods for early electronic banking systems. The basic principles are still in use, though of course the specific implementations have evolved tremendously." As we passed around these artifacts from Grandma's secret professional life, she began to explain why she had kept this part of herself relatively hidden from the family. When I started in computing in the 1960s, it was actually more open to women than it later became, she explained. The field was so new that there weren't entrenched gender expectations yet. Companies just needed smart people who could solve problems. She looked at the women around the table, me, Emma, Aunt Patricia, and Susan. But as time went on and the industry became more prestigious and lucrative, women started getting pushed out. By the time I retired in the mid-90s, I was often the only woman in technical meetings. "Why didn't you ever tell us about all this, Mom?" Dad asked, still looking bewildered. Grandma smiled gently. "Your father was very traditional in some ways, Thomas. He was proud of me, but he was also a product of his generation. He preferred that I didn't show off my professional accomplishments at social gatherings. After a while, it became habit to focus on family rather than career when talking about myself." She turned to Derek. "That's partly why I've been so interested in your work, Derek. It's been a way to stay connected to a field I loved, even if from a distance." Derek looked genuinely contrite. "I've been explaining basic concepts to you like you were a complete novice. All this time, you probably understood everything I was talking about better than I did." "Not better," Grandma corrected kindly. "Differently. You're working with tools and systems I never had the opportunity to use. I'm sure there are many areas where your knowledge exceeds mine." She pulled out another photo, this one more recent, from perhaps the early 2000s, showing her at a computer with a much more modern setup than the earlier photos. "I've kept up as best I could after retirement. I took courses at the community college, read journals, followed the industry news. The fundamentals don't change, even if the implementations do. I still code a little, though mostly for fun now." The family sat in stunned silence, absorbing this revelation. My mind was racing back through countless family gatherings where Derek had pontificated about technology while Grandma listened patiently, not because she was a technologically illiterate elderly woman, but because she was an experienced professional being gracious to a beginner. "You know," Grandma continued, looking at the array of evidence spread across her Easter tablecloth, "there's something liberating about finally sharing this with you all. I've always been proud of my work, but I was raised in an era when women were taught not to boast about professional accomplishments." She looked directly at Derek. "Which brings me to something I've been wanting to discuss with you, Derek. Could you tell me more about the specific problem your team is trying to solve right now? Not the business impact or market position, the actual technical challenge." All eyes turned to Derek, who suddenly looked very much like a student called to the blackboard for a problem he hadn't studied. Derek shifted uncomfortably in his chair. For the first time since I could remember, he seemed at a loss for words. "Well, we're working on optimizing our recommendation algorithm," he finally said. "It's a neural network-based system that predicts user preferences." Grandma nodded encouragingly. "Interesting. And what specific challenges are you encountering with the model?" "We're having issues with overfitting," Derek admitted. "The model performs great on training data, but doesn't generalize well to new users." The eternal struggle," Grandma said with genuine understanding. "We faced similar issues even with our simpler statistical models back in my day. Have you considered a regularization approach? Perhaps L1 or L2 norms?" Derek looked both surprised and relieved that she understood the problem. "We've tried L2, but it's not giving us the results we hoped for." "What about dropout techniques?" Grandma suggested. "Or perhaps ensemble methods to combine multiple models." As Derek began to explain their current approach in more technical detail, I watched a transformation happen. The condescension was gone from his voice, replaced by the authentic enthusiasm of someone discussing a genuine challenge with a knowledgeable colleague. For perhaps the first time, he was talking about his work without trying to impress or intimidate, just communicating clearly about a problem he cared about solving. Grandma listened attentively, occasionally asking clarifying questions that demonstrated her deep understanding of the underlying principles, even if some of the specific technologies were new to her. "You know," she said thoughtfully after Derek had explained their approach, "this reminds me of a pattern recognition problem we tackled in the 80s. The context was different, but the mathematical challenge sounds similar." We found that breaking the problem into smaller, specialized models rather than one comprehensive solution gave us better results. Derek's eyes widened. That's basically federated learning. It's a cutting-edge approach right now. Grandma smiled. Different name, similar concept. The principles of good system design tend to recur, even as the technology evolves. The tension that had dominated the table earlier had completely dissipated. Even family members who couldn't follow the technical details were captivated by this unexpected exchange and the visible shift in Derek's demeanor. After several minutes of this authentic technical discussion, Derek sat back in his chair. He looked around the table, then back to Grandma, and his expression changed to one of genuine remorse. "I owe everyone an apology," he said, his voice quieter than I'd heard it in years. "Especially you, Grandma. I've been insufferable. Talking down to you, to everyone, when clearly I'm not the authority I thought I was." The admission hung in the air. No one jumped to contradict him or minimize his behavior. It was a moment of truth that had been long overdue. "Why did you never correct me?" he asked Grandma. "All those times I explained basic concepts to you like you were completely clueless." Grandma's expression was gentle. "Would it have helped if I had? At your age, I remember needing to feel like an expert too. It seemed kinder to let you have that confidence while you found your footing in your career." "But I've been so arrogant," Derek said, the realization seeming to hit him freshly. "To everyone." He looked at me. "Especially to you, Madison. I've been dismissive of your teaching career like it somehow required less intelligence or skill than what I do. I hadn't expected this moment of reckoning and wasn't quite prepared for how to respond. You have been pretty unbearable, I admit it, but without the anger I would have felt earlier. It's hurt to have my work constantly belittled." Derek nodded, accepting this. "I don't even know why I felt the need to do that. It's like once I got into tech, I built my whole identity around being the smart one in the family." "Perhaps," Grandma suggested, "because you were defining intelligence too narrowly. There are many kinds of brilliance in this family." She looked around the table. Emma's ability to remain compassionate while making split-second medical decisions. Justin's talent for helping people understand their finances. Madison's gift for opening children's minds to learning. Derek nodded slowly. "I think I also got caught up in the culture. My whole work environment rewards a certain kind of aggressive confidence. Admitting you don't know something is seen as weakness." "That sounds exhausting," Aunt Patricia commented. "It is," Derek admitted. "Always having to position yourself as the expert, never being able to ask for help or show uncertainty." The conversation opened up then, with family members sharing their perspectives on Derek's behavior over the past few years. There was honesty but not cruelty, a family working through a difficult dynamic together. I finally felt able to express things I'd been holding back. "It's been hard watching you change from my supportive big brother into someone who seemed to need to put me down to feel good about himself. I've missed the old Derek." His face showed genuine regret. "I've missed him too, honestly. Somewhere along the way, I started believing that my value came from being perceived as the smartest person in the room. It's been lonely." Grandma reached over and patted his hand. "Intelligence without wisdom or kindness isn't worth much in the end. The most brilliant minds I worked with were also the most humble and generous with their knowledge." As the conversation continued, Derek asked Grandma more about her career, this time with genuine curiosity rather than competitive edge. She shared stories about the challenges of being a woman in a male-dominated field, the excitement of solving previously impossible problems, and the camaraderie of the early tech pioneers. "Would you show me where you used to work sometime?" Derek asked. "If any of the places are still around?" "I'd like that," Grandma smiled. "Some of the buildings are still there, though the companies have changed. And I believe the Computer History Museum has some of the machines I worked on." "We should all go," I suggested, surprising myself with the enthusiasm I felt for this family outing. "I want to see where Grandma made history." The mood had shifted so dramatically from the tense beginning of the meal that it felt like a different gathering entirely. Derek was helping clear plates, asking questions, and actually listening to the answers. He asked about my second grader's reading project with genuine interest, and even complimented Emma on the complexity of the medical systems she navigated daily. As we moved to the living room with coffee and Grandma's famous carrot cake, there was a new ease in our family dynamic, as if a splinter that had been causing pain for years had finally been removed. The rest of Easter afternoon unfolded with a warmth and authenticity our family gatherings had lacked for years. We gathered in Grandma's cozy living room, the spring sunlight filtering through lace curtains as we continued to explore the newly revealed dimensions of her life. Derek, in a gesture that would have been unthinkable hours earlier, volunteered to help with the dishes. I joined him in the kitchen, curious about this transformed version of my brother. "I still can't believe Grandma was essentially a pioneer in computing," he said as he rinsed plates. "And she never bragged about it, not once. Unlike someone I know," I teased, but without malice. He winced but accepted the jab. "I deserved that. I've been insufferable, haven't I? You've been building your identity around being the tech genius for so long, I wasn't sure there was anything left of the real Derek underneath." He handed me a dripping plate. "There is. I'm finding him again, I think." Through the kitchen doorway, we could see Grandma in her armchair, surrounded by family members as she showed them more artifacts from her professional past. Her face was animated in a way I rarely saw, freed from the self-imposed restraint that had kept this part of herself hidden for so long. "Why do you think she never told us?" asked Derek quietly. He considered this. Different generation, different expectations. Plus, I think there's something elegant about accomplishing great things without needing constant validation for them. I raised my eyebrows. That's surprisingly insightful coming from the guy who mentions his stock options in every conversation. "Former guy," he corrected with a sheepish smile. "I'm retiring that personality effective immediately." When we rejoined the family, Grandma and Dad were having a quiet conversation. "I wish you'd shared more of this with us growing up, Mom," Dad was saying. "I had no idea the magnitude of what you were doing." "Your father was supportive in his way," Grandma replied gently. "But he preferred that home be separate from work. And after he passed, it just didn't seem important to correct everyone's assumptions." "Still," Dad insisted, "we should have known. We should have celebrated your achievements." Grandma patted his hand. "I wasn't looking for celebration, dear. The work itself was rewarding enough." In the weeks that followed Easter, our family experienced a remarkable transformation. Derek called me the very next day, something he hadn't done spontaneously in years. "I'm sorry," he said simply, "for all of it. The condescension, the interrupting, the salary comments. You're an amazing teacher, and I've been a jerk about it." "Apology accepted," I replied, surprised by how ready I was to forgive once he showed genuine remorse. "But actions speak louder than words, you know." "I know. That's why I was wondering, could I visit your classroom sometime? See what you actually do all day." That visit happened the following week. Derek sat in the back of my classroom, watching as I guided 23 second graders through a science lesson about habitats. Afterwards, he seemed genuinely impressed. "I couldn't do what you do," he admitted as we walked to the parking lot. "The patience, the way you explain the same concept 5 different ways until everyone got it. That's a skill set I definitely don't have." "Different kinds of intelligence," I reminded him, echoing Grandma's words. Derek's transformation wasn't instantaneous or perfect. Years of habits don't disappear overnight, but there was a sincerity to his efforts that touched me. He asked questions about teaching challenges, listened to the answers, and stopped interrupting me in family conversations. Meanwhile, Grandma's revelations had inspired a family project. I began recording her stories about her tech career, preserving this important family and computing history. We discovered that some of her work was actually documented in computer history books, though often without giving her proper credit. Women's contributions were frequently minimized or attributed to male colleagues, she explained without bitterness. That was just the reality of the time. A month after Easter, we organized the family trip to the Computer History Museum. Watching Grandma explain the machines she had once worked on, some now behind glass as historical artifacts, was a powerful experience. Her eyes lit up with recognition and memory as she pointed out features and shared anecdotes not included in the official museum descriptions. "I remember when this was cutting edge," she said, standing before an early IBM mainframe. "We thought it was miraculous to have this much computing power." Derek, who had been quietly absorbing everything, asked thoughtful questions that allowed Grandma to share her expertise. The competitive edge was gone from his voice, replaced by genuine curiosity and respect. The most profound change, though, was in our family dynamic. The hierarchy that had placed Derek at the top due to his supposedly superior career had been permanently disrupted. In its place was a more balanced appreciation for the different paths we had each chosen. At our next family gathering, a casual barbecue at Dad's house, I noticed how differently everyone interacted. Derek talked about his work when asked, but with humility and without dominating the conversation. He showed interest in others' lives and listened more than he spoke. Grandma, too, seemed lighter somehow. Freed from the self-imposed constraint of hiding her technical knowledge, she engaged more actively in discussions about current technology and occasionally shared relevant anecdotes from her career. As for me, I found myself appreciating Derek again in a way I hadn't for years. Glimpses of my actual brother were re-emerging from behind the tech bro facade, his quick wit, his problem-solving mind, and most importantly, his capacity for growth and change. One evening, while helping Grandma in her garden, I asked the question that had been on my mind since Easter. "Weren't you ever tempted to put Derek in his place? All those times he was being condescending about technology to everyone, including you." Grandma looked up from the tomato plant she was staking. "What would that have accomplished, dear? Embarrassing him? Making him defensive? True confidence doesn't need to announce itself or diminish others." She brushed soil from her hands. "Besides, everyone discovers their own humility eventually. Some through failure, some through success, and some, like Derek, through realizing how much they don't know." I considered this wisdom as I helped her gather fresh herbs for dinner. "I think I've been defining success too narrowly too," I admitted. "Measuring my worth by comparing my career to Derek's, by his standards. The only measure that matters is whether your work brings you fulfillment and contributes something worthwhile," Grandma said. "Everything else is just noise." As the summer progressed, our healing family found a new equilibrium. Derek's genuine efforts to change had rebuilt bridges I thought were permanently burned. Grandma's revelations had given us all a new perspective on achievement, humility, and the quiet dignity of doing important work without needing constant validation. The most important lesson I took from this unexpected family revelation was about assumptions, how easily we create narratives about people based on superficial information, and how wrong those narratives can be. My quiet, pie-baking grandmother had been a computing pioneer. My supposedly superior brother had been masking insecurity with arrogance. And I had been measuring my worth using someone else's flawed yardstick. Easter dinner had changed everything, not through dramatic confrontation, but through the gentle power of truth finally revealed. In exposing the reality of her remarkable past, Grandma had given our family much more than a history lesson. She had given us a path forward, grounded in authentic appreciation for the different forms of intelligence and contribution that each of us brings to the world. Has someone in your family ever surprised you with a hidden talent or untold story from their past? How did it change your perspective on them? Share your experiences in the comments below, and don't forget to like and subscribe if this story resonated with you. Sometimes the wisest people in our lives are the quietest about their own achievements. Who in your life might have untold stories waiting to be discovered?